I've been back for Quarry Lakes, but I need to go back and look at this problem.
If you want to refer it to me.
Right, but it's, yeah, to get to
Rock
that.
salt.
We'll call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order on the 16th of May at 7 p.m. Roll call, Mr. Miller,
Present.
Mr. Janik,
Here.
Mr. Van Truen,
Here.
Mr. Bukovac,
Here.
Mr. Goodell has a letter on file, Mr. Winarski,
Here.
and the chair is here. Council President Dietrich has a letter on file also. I will need a motion to excuse Mr. Dietrich and Mr. Goodell. Mr. Miller.
So moved to excuse the two who have letters on file.
Mr. Winarski.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to excuse Mr. Goodell and Mr. Dietrich. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. They are excused. We have one item for the Finance Committee, A16-23. It was submitted by Mr. Jeffries and Mr. Barnes, the street foreman. And it is a resolution authorizing the Safety Service Director to participate in the ODOT winter contract for road salt and declaring an emergency. Mr. Jeffries, you submitted this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to defer to the mayor on this one.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We do this every year about now. ODOT sends us a letter, and this letter does come fairly late. We just got it at the very beginning of May. I think May 3rd we received it. Of course, they tell us we have to respond between May 9th and May 27th with our need to join them with this salt purchase. So what they allow us to do, they allow us and a lot of other municipalities to join in on their bulk bid for salt. It actually helps the state get a lower price for themselves, and it helps because of the quantities, and it helps the city to get a lower price. Just a little bit of background, we typically use about 3,500 tons of salt in a typical winter. Last year wasn't very typical, so we're only going to be asking for 2,000 tons this year. What this document always does, you have to commit to purchase at least 90% of that. You can't go over 110% of that, so you have to have a pretty accurate commitment. So we decided on 2,000 tons. We've got just over 2,000 tons stored in the facility now. So next year, we're hoping if salt's somewhere near where it come in last year, around $55 a ton, we should have about a $75,000 savings in salt next year. So this just allows us to get into that agreement with the state. I need the emergency in. It needs to be passed on the first reading so we can meet that Friday, May 27th deadline the state puts on us. So if you have any other questions, entertain them.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
We'll take A-16-23 to the floor council and declaring emergency.
Mr. Winarski.
I'll second it.
There's a motion and a second to take A16-23 to the floor of council with the emergency. Are there any further comments or questions? Seeing none, voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion is carried 7-0, and it will be taken to the floor of council with the emergency. That's all I have, gentlemen. Mr. Winarski.
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Bukovac.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
This is over by us, huh?
We are adjourned at 7:05. The next meeting that we have is Building and Lands.
I'd like to call this committee meeting together or in order for Building and Lands. We'll use the previous meeting minutes from the finance meeting. We have in front of us A-1625, which is the authorization to approve the preserve at Quarry Lakes as a planned development district. We have a guest speaker, Mr. Sean Brady, who's going to be presenting. Mr. Brady, would you like to take the podium?
Can I speak real quick first, Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
You might remember a while back, council passed the Planned Development District ordinance. This is our city's first use of that. This is our first developer that is asked to use that ordinance. So this did go through Planning Commission. The first step was the general plan was approved, and then the final plan was approved and asked to be sent to council for your final approval. So Mr. Brady is here to give you a presentation. This did pass unanimously on to ask for city council's approval. So thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of council. Before we get into the new request that's before you, I wanted to talk about the original Quarry Lakes and kind of recap the property that we currently own over there and have owned in the past. The first phase of Quarry Lakes, we came before this body and Planning Commission and got it rezoned to multifamily, which is an R3 zoning. And that was several years ago. I don't even recall how long ago it was. With the commitment that before we would come to the city with anything in the future, we would have a plan that the city could approve in addition to the zoning or in conjunction with the zoning. That property was built out at over 4 units per acre. They were basically attached condominiums. They started in a pinwheel design and they advanced into what's considered a detached cluster. There's no individual parcels. They're all part of a big association where they pay into a fund to manage all of the areas surrounding each building, and it's maintained for them, and everybody has equal use to that. The land that's immediately adjacent to the south is the land that we currently own, and there's roughly 30 acres of land that is bordered by Route 2 on one side, the Colby Road on the west, and currently a church on the east, and then to the north is the first phase of Quarry Lakes. We're requesting the PDD zoning, which, as the mayor said, was unanimously approved by Planning Commission after a couple of work sessions there and regular meetings. The plan that I passed out tonight calls for 100 single-family homes with designated property lines and fee simple ownership interests. There's over 40% green space in the development, and that's in addition to the individual yards. That green space is common space. That number would be significantly higher if we took into account all the yards that would be typically done in a cluster type of development. The reason that we're not pursuing a cluster development is because our target market, as many of you can probably appreciate having their own boundaries and their own property lines and so on and so forth. And we'll leave that in a little bit. By way of this layout and the aggregation of the homes and the lots, the people on Colby Road will have over a 300-foot buffer from the back of their property to the closest new construction. The people to the north who were at the Planning Commission meeting, and I'm in the process of setting up an appointment with them to kind of review some buffering between their condominium association and our property. And many of you remember, every time we do a project in the city of Amherst or anywhere else, we meet with the adjacent residents, and we definitely seek their input and try to mitigate any type of impact on that. In this particular case, they're both like uses, residential in nature, but we feel that the folks that are going to be moving into these single-family homes will probably be younger families, whereas in the first phase of the Quarry Lakes, there's only one family that's in that entire development. So we think that there's some compatibility, but at the same time, there needs to be a little bit of protection of the original condominium association's public properties that they have within there. I think one of the big things to emphasize, and a few of the councilmen have already started talking about that prior to the meeting, is the emphasis on stormwater management. Like many of the communities in Lorraine County, Amherst has some issues with stormwater. And it would be foolish of a developer to come in and say that, you know, we're just gonna develop to the city standards and hope to gain your approval. In this particular case, we're exceeding the stormwater management standards by 400% at a minimum. So in the city's standards are based on worst case scenarios. So in a sense, you could say we're 400% greater than a worst case scenario. And I think we've already demonstrated our commitment to the adjacent residents before, several years ago, before we even thought about developing this property. We took care of a lot of their existing water issues. The target market for this community is going to be the workforce participants. You're looking at nurses, teachers, police, firemen, veterans, working at Ford, potentially UPS. There's a huge gap that our marketing information is providing, and that we sent that packet to all the council. You guys can review it. But basically, the gap that exists is everybody that's in that workforce, they really don't have any new housing opportunities. If they want to live in a new house, they have to go rent. It's that simple. And by being able to creatively use the zoning code and architecturally control the community, we're able to reach that target market. And what that packet will tell you is that anybody that's making around $50,000 a year, or actually it's over $38,000 a year, can buy one of these houses with a payment of right around $1,100. So that's pretty significant if you think about home ownership for these folks. And these are the type of folks that everybody wants in their community. The home plans are going to be 5 home plans, all with 2-car garages. They start with a 1,300 square foot single story ranch. All these plans are in your packets. Also, I have boards to display them if you'd like to see them. Their price range is going to be anywhere from $175 to the low 200s, with the smallest home being a 1,300 square foot single story ranch. And everybody's read, you know, there's all these new rental communities that are coming up for the empty nester, the snowbirds, or whatever you want to label them. You know, they're talking about $1,500 a month rent. A lot of people, frankly, don't want to rent a house. They want to live in their own house. And so that plan is going to be geared towards that type of a buyer. But we think that predominantly we're going to see the other plans that are all 2-story with 2-car garages, and they go as high as 2,200 square feet with 5 bedrooms. We think we're going to see the majority of those. As far as the architectural controls, there was a lot of discussion in the Planning Commission and with the law director. You know, we're committing to these 5 home plans. We're committing to the color controls, the layout of all the garages, as well as the orientation of each house, and each plan is going to coincide with a lot. So for example, if you pick a house, then you're going to be designated one of the lots that house is already predetermined on. So there's a lot of architectural controls. There's limited buyer choices in terms of what they can do on the outside. We're even going to go as far as dictating exactly where they can put sheds, so they don't become a hodgepodge, and what those sheds can be made of. It's a very controlled environment, so I guess in a sense, you can see this being we're taking all the best things out of a cluster community where they have all that architectural continuity and that type of thing, but we're allowing it in a fee simple type of arrangement, which will be geared towards the target market that we're talking about. I did, I'm sure it'll come up during questions, so maybe I should just open the floor to questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll open the floor for questions at this time. Miller?
Yes, I had a few concerns. A couple of the concerns were the proximity of the homes together. We're looking at only 5 feet on each side, 10 feet total between homes. And I'm concerned, I think that would be, I'm sure if it's gone through planning, our chief's here as well, our fire, there's no issues with that proximity and how they're gonna be built for maintaining, safety of fire in one, that close to the next. The second thing that concerns me is we have near 100 units already in the front, and now we're gonna add another 100 in the back. And we're gonna bring all 200, and if we average 1.5 cars per home, we're at 300 cars coming out on the Cooper Foster right there. Without a light, we have 4 lanes, 2-lane road each way. I get concerned that it's gonna really jam things up a little bit when it comes to traffic. I did speak to you earlier, I liked how you had oversized your retention ponds. The third concern is who's gonna maintenance them? Is the HOA gonna be able to have those ponds upkeep and the amount of water that's gonna be released? I'm sure that's been worked out for water management. Those were just some of the concerns that I had looking at this. I don't see a whole lot of uses for this property besides what you're trying to do, so I can completely understand the approach. We were looking at, Councilwoman Masoka and I were looking at the easements out, and this Colby Road's a very challenging road to be easing out for a second.
That's correct.
The only other way out is onto Terra, and that would have to be going through the church property, and I don't know what availability is there. I just get concerned that that's a lot of vehicles coming out onto the road during certain times. If this is going to be a workforce community, it only exacerbates these times of 7 to 8 in the morning to, 4:30, 5:30 in the evening of people getting in and out. That's all I had. Thank you. And if you want to respond to any of that, that's great. And
I'd be happy
I was gonna say, let's give Mr. Brady a chance to respond to the several questions that Mr. Miller had. Thank you.
With respect to the traffic signalization, the subject of traffic in general, that whole subject came up at Planning Commission by one of the folks that live in the existing Quarry Lakes. And really, your observation is correct. With new development, there's always going to be new traffic. The issue, and he was advocating for a light at the intersection of Meadow, or I think it's Meadowview Lane and Cooper Foster Park. And with my past experience in Avon, the one thing that I've found is that when you add a light, there's always the adverse reaction to it out in the general public. So by doing that, it'd be great when you're leaving, but when you're coming back, it would be a mess. So as a general rule, and I think Planning Commission agreed, as a general rule, if there is some traffic stacked up on Meadowview, that's a personal problem.
Mhm.
Now, what Planning Commission is extremely concerned about is ingress and egress for safety vehicles. And and it's not properly shown on that plan, but we do have access points out on a Colby. Under no circumstances did they want us to have a curb cut out there for the general use of the community. But what they would like to have right there, that's correct. What's gonna happen there is there's gonna be a hard surface, but it's gonna look like grass with a breakaway chain that any of the emergency vehicles can come and go at any time. So.
Solves that right away.
That does
Thank you,
solve it
thank you.
really well. Yeah.
It's
I'm
good to
sorry,
hear.
Can you tell us, the rest of us, where this is at?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We actually have a piece of property that goes out on Colby. Everybody knows where that dangerous bend is. It's south of there, several hundred feet, and that's where we're gonna put an emergency vehicle entrance. I'll be happy to point it out.
Is that what's on the map here now? The green space going to the pole?
Yeah, you can see, you can see where this orange line is that designates a phase. This road is actually just gonna continue right out into, I'll show you.
I see, there, I see the property designation. Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right. So we're gonna, so
Can you get a
basically.
smart board and you can show us something?
Soon. Coming
So
soon
it's
to
gonna
a city
come out there.
Near you.
near you.
So just to clarify though, this would be for emergency access only for emergency vehicle.
That was Planning Commission's preference? I think it makes sense. I mean, that way the city, it's easier to control traffic at one, pressure point in Meadowview and Cooper Foster Park. And I think the other thing is, is, and it gets back to what I touched on at the beginning, it's not 200 homes of people in the workforce. Predominantly, the 100 homes in the first phase are, you know, they're generally not taking kids to school. There's only one family there, so they're not leaving at 7:20 or whatever. And even now, with bus traffic the way it is, school times are staggered. So a lot of people's work schedule works around how they're dropping their kids off at school. So I think it looks worse than it probably is going to be, but however it's going to be in our street, and it'll be the issue of the residents that are in that community as opposed to the overall city.
Thank you.
Mr. Van Turen, did you have a question?
You actually answered my question about the additional interest for safety vehicles, so thank you very much, that's all.
Mr. Winarski?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking at this and it reminds me a little bit of the Rock Creek Run area. And those people fought tooth and nail just to keep one entrance coming in and out. So for whatever reason, they're happy with it. But when you talk about this entrance to the side and you talk about a chain, I think of the word gate immediately, which is a really bad word around here. I don't want to repeat history. How do we know we don't repeat history with a gate or something like that? And we have our one of our chiefs for safety services here. I'm imagining you prefer a second entrance into the development.
Yeah, naturally, you would always.
Sorry to drag into this.
Have another entrance, but I think if you, another place this exists already is in the condo development. There is a chain at the end of the street that leads out on the Middle Ridge. And there is a hard surface there, but it's not used, and it is grassed over.
Country
It's
Walk.
there, but it's not like the Dodge Drive gate, which I know everybody's aware of.
Country Walk is similar, correct?
Between that and.
Between that and,
By Charles.
Agree.
Yeah.
that's what I'm
No,
going
that's not heavy, I don't think, for truck traffic.
Okay.
It's a walkway gate, I don't think that's, maybe a service way, but not an emergency service, I don't think, I don't.
Okay, understood.
I guess what I'm asking is when you hand out your literature to sell these, something in there, this will never be a road.
Right.
Anything you can let them know that, so they're not coming up here.
Right, and to Mr. Miller's point about the homeowners association, the thing that pretty much anybody in the development community that's been paying attention to people in government is that these associations, if they're not professionally managed, they become a thorn in the side of the city government. So what we're gonna have in our documents is that it's mandatory that it's a professional management company. It's not gonna be a retired guy that lives there that says, well, I can hire somebody to cut their grass. They're not gonna be permitted to do that. So there's gonna be a board of directors, not too dissimilar to city council with the administration, and then there's gonna be a professional management company that manages all these areas. And that'll be the city's direct connection point if there's ever any issue, so you don't have to try and corral 100 residents and to get your point across, which nobody likes to do.
Okay. You had mentioned 400% above your minimum standard for water.
Actually, above the way the city
Yeah.
standard reads is it's a 100-year flood. You have to manage the water for a 100-year flood, so that's the maximum standard. We're 400% above that.
And how do you make that happen with the retention here?
Just the size. So basically what happens when there's a bad storm, we have so much capacity back there that it holds it until the bad storm goes away and all your other downstream stuff is kind of returned to normal, and then we release into that. So it's just a longer hold is basically what it amounts to.
Okay, and I just have to ask, how much are you abating this property for?
How much is
Are you
that?
abating, giving tax abatements? Did you request a TIF or anything like that?
No, this is.
Concessions for utilities?
No.
I just want to say thank you for doing business better than they do in the Northeast. Thank you. That's
Thank you,
it.
sir. Appreciate
That's all.
Mr. Bruggeback?
Thank you, Mr. Winarski, also for the entertainment. So, on the stormwater, thank you very much for taking that into consideration, 400%. What my only concern would be on the stormwater is not for the property, the PDD going in, but for the Colby Road residents. I know there's been some complaints in the past, even though there wasn't development there, of some of the yard flooding, the water changing. Is there any kind of drainage being installed between those properties and the new green space?
No, what we've done, those properties are really low. What we have done, and by the time this is done, we will have intercepted 100% of all of our water runoff. So the only issues that exist on Colby Road, those yards used to flood. Before we the big pond that's on that drawing, before we put that, part of it is already in, and before we put that in, it was a mess. Mr. Hempthorne, he couldn't even swim in his pool half the time, because it was surrounded by water, literally. So, you know, we've done just about everything and anything we can above and beyond the call of duty to alleviate those problems. And I think that anything that's left, it just has to be done by them internally.
Okay. I just didn't want to have us build up, I know there's some mounds going in, obviously for landscaping. We're building up ground that's going to then create another valley.
That's a good point. Actually, I should clarify, because we're gonna continue to manage through swales any of the water that they're currently draining onto our property. So we're not gonna block that up. I guess
Okay.
maybe that was part of your question. We're not gonna build a buffer along there and say, you're stuck with this water because it's coming from you. We're gonna continue to absorb it and deal with it.
Perfect, thank you. You mentioned that the green space is going to be, all this green space is going to be a manicured, managed space, it's just not gonna grow in, correct?
Right.
Beautiful. The only question I have remaining is the street that is a dead end between lots 91 and 67. If there's no intention of that road extending, how come it's not a cul-de-sac there?
Because that's going to be the emergency access point for
Okay.
the safety services.
All right, as long as that's going to be explained to the residents when the question comes.
Right.
Great, thank you. No further questions.
We'll be happy to place signage there, or whatever, makes sense.
Yes, Mr. Brady, what is there to keep the homeowners from actually disbanding and deciding, eventually that they're just gonna go off on their own?
That would, I think, just basically, they lose the protection of their investment. I mean, you would have to have 100 people that say, okay, this can be the Wild West, and they would have to agree to it. We're putting protections in place that they can't disband this. There's an agreement. If you buy a house in here, you're part of this association, and that's the way it is. It's not disbandable.
Okay, in other words, if you got somebody who wanted to divorce themselves from the harem,
They
they can't do that?
They can't. They're absolutely obligated. Yeah, to the extent where the management company has a right to lien their property to pay the dues. Now, they could try to divorce it financially, which some of them do, but again, keep in mind that there's a process by which, this management, the professional management team is going to be governed. And residents will have a seat at the table. And generally, when you have 100 homes in a community, you're not talking about a significant amount of money. We're not talking like $200 or $300 a month, because that would completely defeat the purpose of us trying to provide workforce housing. So it's going to be a nominal amount of money, and generally, that won't be, I just don't see that being reasonable for anybody to try to do that. And even if they did, they can't do it.
I think Mr. Carlson, you have a comment.
Oh, I don't know that I did, but if you'd like me to comment.
I would love it.
Since you asked.
He seems to be wanting to comment.
So this is kind of an unusual process that we're undertaking for the first time in the city. And what we're doing here is different from a simple, or a subdivision. So the idea of the planned development district is that the developer comes before the city with a concept that may be somewhat unique, that allows flexibility with some of the other zoning regulations. For example, in this case, the size of the lots. And I think the developer would say, well, what we're trying to do here is fit a development into a somewhat unique piece of property that allows for an abundance of green space, adequate drainage. And kind of the trade-off is we're going to have a development that allows for these smaller size of lots. Now, what should be a feature of the plan development is some kind of concept about what the plan is in the development. In other words, we're not just going to create a subdivision with small lots and let anything go on the lots. So what is, I think, an important feature of what comes before you are the elevations, which he's shown you and which are part of the plan. In other words, he's represented to council that these are the permitted types of homes, and we're not going to do anything else other than that. I had understood that he was going to have a color palette, and I guess he does have that, which is also part of the plan. And then there's the document that he submitted to the Planning Commission on February the 22nd, which has to do with guidelines for the development in terms of what can be done there, issues related to fencing, I think, accessory structures and so on and so forth. Those things presumably are all going to be incorporated into the homeowners association documents, so that when this is the development is finalized, those homeowners the covenants and restrictions are going to be before the law director for his review and approval, and before the planning commission. Now, what we had in this case was kind of a little bit of a bump in the road in that I don't think we were aware that this was going to be developed in phases. So the plan development ordinance says that before council is going to approve the final development plan, it needs all of these things, including actually a finalization of the homeowners association documents. And that is the one thing that we don't have that the ordinance would seem to require. Let me just say that. But I think what the council needs to understand as well is that the plan development is a rezoning imprinted with a plan, but it also is a subdivision, so that when the developer comes back to the planning commission for subdivision approval, it's very clear at that point under chapter 1114 that he's going to have for the first phase in the subdivision a legally prepared homeowners association document, which I trust will incorporate all of those guidelines that he's submitted to the planning commission. So even though that technicality hasn't been met at this juncture, it will be met in connection with the subdivision approval. That's clear. So there's going to be a subdividers agreement, approval of the HOA documents, and so on and so forth. What the developer wants from council today is an approval of the general concept of the plan. So if you were to adopt and recommend to council that this be approved on its first reading, and it should go through 3 readings, what the council is approving is that layout that's been submitted to you, and it's not going to be deviated from, the elevations, the colors, and the guidelines as part of that concept, which is the plan. So from my point of view, I don't see any reason why the council could not go forward with this at this time, knowing that in connection with the subdivision, some of the I's and the T's are going to be dotted. There's kind of a duplication of things actually in the 2 ordinances. I don't know if that raises more questions than it answers, but it's the best I can do.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson.
You're very welcome.
I turn the floor back to the chair.
Mr. Miller, then Mr. Buckelman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have just, I guess, this last question that I have, and I know that the HOA guidelines document will be put together with detail and brought before us before the final approval. However, I would hope when you come back with that you'll have some sort of study or some sort of estimate, good faith estimate, in what it's going to cost to maintain these 2 very large water retention ponds. That would be for clearing growth around them, which is by code, inspection, and mowing, replacement of any landscaping that is a part of this. This is a lot of green space. So I'm hoping that we have an idea, or at least when you bring this concept forth, is it realistic in your $50, $100 of association fees? Because at 100 units and $100, Is that
Carlson, do you have something?
I'd like to tackle that because within the last few years, there was a statutory enactment that deals with homeowners associations. Before, it was kind of the Wild West. Everybody would create homeowners association, but there was no statutory guidelines for them, and there was even no express provision in the law for liens for assessments. But now all that's changed. And one of the things that I believe is in the new statute is a requirement of disclosure to the homeowners of the projected expenses of the development in the same way that you would have if you bought a condominium. There are a number of these statutory disclosures that have to be made at the outset. So I know his attorney, Mr. Trigilio,
Yes.
is very experienced in these things, and whatever he produces will comply with the law in that respect.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No further questions.
Mr. Bukovac?
Thank you. That was my original question was gonna be, to refresh us on the PDD, the procedure. If I remember correctly, that our approval of the plan also incorporates the zoning change, correct?
It does,
Okay.
yes.
Because, and then from there, if there was no large deviations of the plan, we would not hear about this, we would not come to council anymore,
That's right.
right? So any other the small changes that happen, the planning commission approves it, we've already given our blessing, so it's gonna stay there, unless there's a major change.
Well, the council has to approve the the council would have to approve the subdivider agreement. But the subdivision itself and a lot
Which
of
is
the
separate from
details-
a PDD though.
Yes, it is separate from a PDD.
Right, so, but for the actual PDD aspect of it, when it goes back to the planning commission, if there's not a major change, it doesn't come to us, but if there's a major change, then the planning commission then can send it off to council as they see fit. Is that correct? If
Yes.
I remember correctly? That was the only questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bukovac. I do have some concerns, Mr. Brady, as well about the traffic. I do live in the area as well. And that is where Cooper Foster goes from 4 lanes down to 2 lanes, right at that entrance. There have been mornings where people catching the bus, kids catching the bus, the cars don't even stop because of that 4-lane traffic pattern. I could see this being a potential issue with more and more of the workforce cars coming out of that development, not stopping for the school buses as well, because very, very few people do anyway. Very often, not just occasionally. This happens almost every morning. So has anyone done a traffic study to see or potential? I know we have another red light, another traffic light up at North Main in Colby, which it wouldn't make sense to put another traffic light there. But again, Mr. Miller said something to the effect, I believe, of asking the church if another roadway could be put in, or an access road to Terra Lane through the church's property might be another way to funnel that traffic up higher onto Terra Lane to Cooper Foster, closer to Route 2, which is where people probably will be going. Has anybody looked into that possibility?
I think, and I have had discussions, I have not engaged a traffic engineer, but I have had discussions with the traffic engineer on this. And based on my experience in Avon, and we've seen so many developments in Avon that are put in, the one thing that is a common denominator amongst all traffic engineers is you want to have controlled access points. And a lot of times dispersing that traffic is dangerous because then it becomes more unpredictable. So now instead of having one curb cut out onto Cooper Foster Park where you have these problems, we're going to have a curb cut down here and then potentially dispersing that traffic, which only gives it, there are 2 points that you have to try to have some control. So it almost, it's somewhat counterintuitive because when, Avon first started getting all the development that we got, we would just throw traffic lights at everything. And then we're like, oh my, we just, it's a mess. So now we're, trying to reorganize it. So I don't think, my personal opinion and the opinion of the traffic engineer that I talked to, who does a lot of work for your consulting engineer, a single controlled access point is the absolute best remedy for any issue that you're going to have here. It's creating another access point on the Cooper Foster Park now or in the future is, it's going to be cumbersome.
We talked earlier about some of the complications of this project being done in 4 different phases. This is actually one of the good portions of this being done in phases. This first phase is only 27 homes. he'll have to come in front of planning commission for the next phase to approve all the lots, and if we see there's a traffic problem, I can guarantee you, planning commission is gonna do some traffic studies. I think as a whole, we just thought with the first phase, it wasn't necessary yet, so we'll be looking at that as planning commission, as the
Right.
phases come in front of us, if that helps.
Great. And then the other question, as far as the condominium complex, the two would not have the same association, so
No,
the homeowners would not be entitled to the use of
No.
the Now, has anybody talked to the condo community about how they feel about the development going in as well?
there were 3 adjacent neighbors, and really the only ones that are paying attention are the ones that are along the, immediately adjacent to it.
Right.
And I asked that, they set up an appointment with whoever wants to be there, and I'll be happy to talk to them and meet with them and, hear what they have to say about what's going on there.
Thank you. And then last question about the lighting within the new the new park. Is there gonna be sufficient lighting put in as far as street lamps and street lights? Because currently, I don't believe there's much lighting throughout the condominium complex.
We did submit a proposed lighting plan for our new subdivision here. And just like the homeowners association documents, we submitted those, and they were off of another development. We submitted them incomplete, just so everybody can, if you guys want to have some input on that, feel free. We sent them in Word document to where anybody that wants to add to it, or, just bring something up, because we do have really good legal counsel when it comes to associations.
Okay.
So if there's anything, we wanted it to be a collaborative effort. If there's anything that because we can't visualize the way you guys are visualizing. You see it through your own lens. So if there's something that you want to add to it, feel free to email.
Were
me.
sidewalks included?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sidewalks through all of the developed area. The green space area is designed to just be open green space, almost like the areas, very fieldy and, not cut twice a week or anything like that. There'll be some like taller, I can't think of the exact word. Yeah, thank you. Taller grass,
Mhm.
it's kind of like you can see in the fairway where you don't want to be. Or on the side.
Mr.
No,
Bukabat,
yeah.
any questions?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Mr. Richter.
If we had a development going in that we knew was going to incur excessive traffic for sure, who would be responsible for paying for that traffic light?
Could be worked out between the developer and the city, it's different.
Is it, 'cause I just wanna
It's
make sure
been
that's
tradition,
taken,
it's
that's
been
taken
pretty
into
much
consideration.
tradition, it's upon the developer.
If we get into 4
That's the
years down the road and go, oh, now the city's up for $100,000 for traffic study and traffic light, I think that should be taken into consideration. I don't anticipate as much traffic, I don't think, as Mr. Janik and Mr. Miller are. I don't wanna see Apple Orchard disaster that we have over there, so.
I can probably answer that. I think Mr. Miller would know with his subdevelopment that he lives in, the subdividers agreement includes, and you approved it here recently, if traffic becomes a problem within a certain amount of years,
Yep.
the developer is liable for that traffic light.
So
So we could put that in the subdividers agreement if we work it out. I mean, it would have to be in negotiations developing. So if that's something council would like, it would definitely be something I'll work on.
I can't speak for all of council, but I would like. When is the anticipated time that we'll have that in front of us to approve?
The subdividers agreement?
Correct.
For the first phase, the subdividers agreement should be within a couple weeks, because that's also when through planning and.
Since we're doing a subdivider agreement for multiple phases, when would that language be included for potential traffic control?
It could be at the very beginning phase.
Okay. That would be great. I would love to see it.
Just, and just as a point of clarification, to give you something to think about between now and, because we do own other land in the city, and it's commercially zoned land. The way traffic engineering is done to where it's fair and equitable is the city will set a standard. And they basically grade traffic like you get a kid's report card, A, B, C, or D, or E is failing, or whatever it is. So the city sets a standard. They say, we don't want anything that's below a level of service, that's how they refer to it, a level of service C. So let's say you just want average traffic everywhere. Well, then what happens is, in order for it to be fair and equitable, to charge new people coming in, you have to bring all of your traffic up to a level of service C, at least economically on paper, And in that way, you have a mechanism in place to charge a developer if he comes in. And this is gonna come into play on our other property over by the Cleveland Clinic, because they haven't paid anything, they got tons of trip generation. And, you know, so the last guy coming in can't get stuck with the entire bill, because it just doesn't make sense. But in this particular case, I feel that this could just be a side negotiation that gets inserted into the subdividers agreement, and I'd be shocked if there was ever a light warranted at this intersection.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ventura, did you have a question?
Sure, really quickly, and I apologize if you mentioned this earlier and I didn't hear, but assuming this all goes through approval without any bumps, when do you anticipate selling the first units and starting building?
Our goal is to have a model open and selling January of 2017.
Okay.
So it sounds kind of far away, but as we all know, time flies. The timeline that I anticipated, and I talked to Linda earlier today, is that this will go through the reading process with City Council. The final reading will be on June 27th. And then somewhere over the next couple of weeks, we're responding to some engineering comments that the city engineer brought up. Then we're going to be bringing the subdividers agreement forward. So we're hoping, long story short, we're hoping to start construction of the first phase sometime in August and turn it over to the builder January with the model open.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I believe someone in the back wanted
Yeah.
to say a word.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Francis Paquet. I live in the Quarry
You
Lakes.
should come up. Sir?
Would you like to
Sir?
come up to the podium?
Oh, all right.
Let's just do his name and address.
Then just state your name and address for us at the podium.
Better lighting for the camera.
With the good outline. No, I'm Francis Paquet, and I am on the board of directors at Quarry Lakes Condominiums Association. And of course, the new property is on the south end of us, and maybe it's a little late to bring this sort of thing up, but the last big flood we had 3.5 inches of rain in 24 hours. And our 4 ponds were maxed out and running over on 3.5 inches of rain in 24 hours. And the pond that he has made now that's on that property existing, it overflowed over a spillway. Now, I understand they're putting in more ponds to help take care of that, but they're also making more watershed. So I'm looking at the church that's down the road where this water goes to, and some of the back properties over there also. And another item I wanted to ask about was how close are the homes going to be to our existing homes along that property line? I know there's a ridge of dirt along the south end of our property that belongs to the developer. Is he going to take that out? He's going to level it? Kind of want to know what that's going to be too. And the closeness of the homes to our development, where we have the homes that they're backing up to, most of them started 230,000 up and mostly up. And he's talking about putting homes right next to him that won't even be 200,000. So I'm kind of like, is that going to decrease our value of our property here? So those are my comments on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pape. Mr. Brady, did you want to address those concerns, or?
With respect to home values, they're two totally different markets. So I don't think that the lack of availability for the quality condominiums that you folks live in are going to always ensure that those values are solid. And frankly, having a successful community next to it will ensure it regardless of the price point. So keep in mind, these houses are going to start at 175. And they're going to be architecturally controlled, so I don't think there's any issue with that. As far as the retention, the process that you may or may not know is that we hire an engineer, and our engineer goes in and does all these calculations, and then the city has an engineer that represents them, and he checks those calculations. Well, right now, we're in the process of going back and forth on the best way to handle these the water situation that you described. So people way smarter than me are working on this, and I can tell you that the situation is only gonna get better the more we develop it. Because the more we develop it, the more pound we put in. And the more, you might have heard me say earlier that we're gonna be over 400% greater than what the city requires. So that's a lot of pond. It's a lot of water area, it's a lot of holding. And I think that'll resolve itself. And then the third point you brought up, that mound is on our property. And part of our meeting with the, and I just exchanged emails today, and he was supposed to coordinate, he volunteered with one of your residents. His last name is Mr. Brill, and he volunteered to organize the association board and into a meeting. And so I'll be happy to discuss. I feel that there should be a clean demarc line between your condominium community and our single-family home community. So I think we have a line of interest in that respect. I'm sure we'll be able to come up with something that makes sense. It's probably going to involve us having to have the ability to plant trees and fencing on our property line, whether it's on your side or it's on our side. We have to determine that just yet. And then, did that answer all your questions? Thank you.
Mr. Miller and then Mr. Butterfly.
Thank you. And I got to go back to my earlier question we started with, and I apologize because I have a bunch that we've been talking about. When I read this here the first time, I read that, and there's no page number, so I'll go to the 2/22/16 letter to whom it may concern, pursuant to 11/28/02. Preserve at Quarry Lakes will contain 99 single-family homes. It says, based on market research, price range of the homes will be in the low 200s. And now, Mr. Pape has made a very valid point. We have upper 200s sitting there right now in Quarry Lakes, and then you just said it's going to be starting at 175K.
Right.
Are you expecting that to be the base model? Nobody's going to buy it and build it at 175, but that's the lowest you'll start? Because that does make it a big difference, because when you go from 175 to 225, that's going to take out that income. And the reason I'm a little curious is when you said that 38,000 income would be able to afford these homes. I don't know how. At 38 grand, you're not going to be able to afford $1,200 mortgage. Very few people have that kind of open access to credit to be able to do that.
Right, and I have, I submitted as part of the packet, the market study that coincides with those claims.
Yeah, I don't have that packet, so I apologize for not seeing that.
Yeah, so, and we can discuss this at a later date, but if you look at it on and this was based on $189,590.
Okay, $190,000.
$190,000. And a 4% interest rate. That puts the monthly principal interest taxes and insurance at $1,057. And that's on a 30-year fixed rate. And that allows 64% of the households to be able to afford that. Now, I agree that would probably be a stretch for someone making $30-some thousand. But, you know, when you look at the average wage of firemen and police officers, state troopers, teachers, you know, if they're making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, they shouldn't be priced out of a community like this. And that's what all these papers say, is there's this gap in the market, and it's not servicing the workforce.
You know, and that just speaks to the fact that we should have private wages at that amount. Why? I mean, you just listed all government jobs. And that says to me that there's a problem right there. And I don't want to bring that whole bag of peanuts up here, but I mean, that's probably our biggest problem right there is, and I don't know if you're going to get 100 teachers, firemen, and police to come into your community only, so.
Well, I think if you expand it out, you're talking about, you know, union construction workers, you're talking about even non-union construction workers, because we're in such demand right now. Wages have gone up. So it's not specifically the civil services. You obviously have nurses, you have UPS guys, you have Ford just added more jobs. You know, so these are all people that When you read this marketing report, it makes sense. And you know what, frankly, there's such a small, not all the houses were, in the 230s, 240s over there. Those houses were attached homes that were targeted to a specific demographic, and they're a great neighbor. These guys are the type of people that you want in your community. They're gonna be good cohabitators with what is there.
Mr. Bukova, did you have a question?
I did, thank you. I just haven't noticed only because I have this problem with really small print these days. But we had the black and white copy that came with our packet, and then we had the color version. The only reason I noticed it because I actually got the digital version, thank you for sending that today, where I can enlarge it. They're different.
Yes.
And then we weren't aware of that, we didn't have so the difference being there's an increase of units compared to what we originally received earlier today. Is there, being the preliminary plan, was anticipation of it was the only change for additional units, just squeezing things together or tightening things up, or?
No. What actually happened, it's counterintuitive, it loosened things up, which allowed us to end up with another one unit on a cul-de-sac, and that was because the radius, or radii, however you say it, was, the fire chief wanted it to be bigger. We were required to do turn radius for a fire truck in there, and so, and then there were some other differences. When we first proposed it, we proposed it with a 50-foot right-of-way. The city consulting engineer didn't feel that gave adequate space for all the utilities as well as sidewalks everywhere. So there were some adjustments that happened through planning commission, and unfortunately, council received in the black and white version our initial proposal. So the difference between the black and white version and the colored version was input from the administration, city council, or the mayor and the city engineer.
Excellent, thank you. My other comment is I hope you work really well with the condo to make sure there's an acceptable buffer between them. That's something that'll be important. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I was going to state that as well. In terms of the first 29 houses, is it just a first come, first serve, or are you looking for certain types of homes that you want to sell in terms of that range that goes more towards the 200?
We haven't gotten as far as laying out which home is going to go where.
Okay.
But there's 27 in the first phase. You guys have been submitted all the plans and specifications for those houses, so it's gonna be one of those 5 plans will be on one of those 27 lots. They'll be staggered accordingly. And that may, that's gonna ebb and flow. There's no way anybody could come in and say, these 27 lots are gonna be this one, this one, this one, this one.
Right.
We have 5 plans. We have to have the flexibility to move them around based on, we
But
do
you
all the
wouldn't
market studies in the world. It's just a study.
You wouldn't put 27 of the
No.
2-bedroom ranch?
No,
Okay.
it's a 3-bedroom ranch and no.
Or 3-bedroom, thank you. Mr. Pecora?
No, I appreciate all the questions. They're great questions to ask tonight. One thing we should consider is council should consider is right presently it's zoned R1. I believe the developer, I'm not sure how many homes they put under in that structure, but are utilizing our processes. They're utilizing this new unique feature the city of Amherst is providing to expand the use of that property. And I'm not quite sure what the runoff and the drainage issues would be with our R1, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we're talking over 40% of this property is going to be unencumbered, basically green space, and that's a good thing. So these are great questions, but I also want to applaud the developers for looking at this, taking into consideration that they could have come in here with R1 development, could have done things that, quite frankly, we would have no control over whatsoever because it's R1, and this is what the law provides. They're working with us. These are great questions from council, but I think we have some great developers here that are really going to do a great job and take into consideration our neighbors or their neighbors' concerns as well. So,
Thank you, Mr. Pecora. Mr. Miller?
Yes, thank you again for the floor, and I appreciate your patience here with all these questions. If anything, it'll just get a different perspective on some things. I do recall one of the things that was brought up by Mr. Janik, Chairman Janik, and I'd like to move on that. I'm not sure, Mr. McCartney, our building inspector's in the room, I'm not sure what are the minimum requirements for lighting, but I can promise you right now, what I'm noticing is it's too minimum. Even in our development in North Point, the lighting is insufficient. There's just no doubt about it. I look at that every day and I see that the lighting is insufficient. I don't know if that's because our standards for lighting right now is, that's what the minimum is, and maybe we can look at something like that, because lighting is poor, and we know dark places bring more problems. The second concern I have, and this goes back to the original development where I was at, or I am at currently, is the ingress egress of construction vehicles. If you're gonna do phase one here with 27 units, where are these, who's gonna come in and put the infrastructure in completely? Where are these vehicles entering this lot? And how much is that gonna obstruct Mr. Pepe and the Quarry Lakes? Is this something that you are going to be bringing traffic off of Colby Road to get back here? And if so, how's that going to cause issue with Colby Road residents, with the safety already that is at potentially we're dealing with on Colby Road as we speak? My concern is you're gonna have to put some big vehicles in there to lay that infrastructure in, and even to bring the builds in. And if there's only one entrance in, and you got cement trucks coming in, you have construction vehicles coming in, I get concerned for the people of Quarry Lakes and what they're gonna be dealing with as you build this development. So that'd be my last question, and I think I've covered everything that right now I'm concerned with.
Well, as far as the streetlights are concerned, we'll apply whatever standard you want. You guys collectively agree on it, we'll put them in.
I appreciate
At the end of the day, we turn them over to the city, and you guys are paying the light bill.
Sure.
So,
With LEDs, it's not that much.
Well, whatever it is, yeah.
With LEDs, it's not that much, but
So my point is,
Right.
you know, the only thing we can do at this point is design to your standard. If you want it to be a higher standard, we're happy to do that.
right. I'd like that to go back to planning commission and for lighting. I think it is a true issue. And then for ingress.
So as far as the lighting is concerned, so that's just a macro issue, so whatever, at any time, and we can agree to that in the subdividers agreement, if the city standard changes, while we're putting this phase in, then we'll add the additional light, or if you just see, if they have any idea what it's gonna be. Ramahall will give you a lot of insight into that too, by the way. And as far as egress, for construction vehicles, you know, it gets back to, what we did in a community, or a project that we had in Avon, was we had an access road just like this, and we used that specifically for construction vehicles. And there's not a lot of trip generations there. They come, they generally stay there all day, and then they leave. We could handle it that way, or we could use Meadowview Lane, and I think that's more coordination with the administration and the, police chief, fire chief, however they want to study it and make a recommendation to us, we'd be happy to comply with it.
Mr. Pepe, did you have?
Yes, in regards to using Meadowview Lane, if there's a lot of mud carry off of that property, all that water goes into our ponds, and it fills our ponds up with mud, which means we are responsible for dredging those ponds.
We're required by law, the Ohio EPA does not allow that to happen anymore. So we will be required to have a runoff before we get onto a public road.
Right.
And we're required to keep that road clean.
If there's any carry out there that would not appreciate that over there, because we do get mud runoff even now from a hard rain off that property. But that's what it is.
We run a pretty tight ship with keeping people, we have good control over the trades, and
Thank you.
you guys have plenty of people in the administration.
Mrs. Wassell, you had a
I would like to just make a clarification, Mr. Brady. Right now, the existing situation with the ponds that we have right now is that they get full pretty quick. And the concern is how much of the runoff from the rest of the property goes through those ponds right now. Is pretty much all of that property drained through those ponds, or does it go elsewhere? The existing ponds.
So there's a series of existing ponds within Quarry Lakes, the existing development. Those ponds were put in specifically for that condominium development.
Where does the drain off from the new development go now?
So this new development is gonna, as we discussed earlier, that pond that we put in to basically alleviate the flooding of those 4 or 5 residents,
Yeah,
we're gonna continue to expand that pond.
that's where that's where this pond, this drains to right now.
Correct, that's correct.
So what this is gonna do is it's gonna give additional routing of this area, and actually what it sounds like what you're telling me is that just what's gonna happen is that it's gonna continue to dry up the stuff along North Main, and it's gonna dry up Quarry Lakes, the existing Quarry Lakes, as well as having an impact on the new phase.
I think it's somewhat counterintuitive. In this case, I could say that the more hard surfaces we put in, the better it's gonna be, because we're making the pond so much bigger every time we add those hard surfaces. So it's one of those, again, it's counterintuitive, but it's one of those situations, because of the standard that the city engineer is gonna apply to us all the way through, as we develop, it just continues to get better, it doesn't get worse. Traditional development, you just get the stuff off your property and forget about it, let everybody else worry about it. Those days are over. So we would be naive to come here and think that we could just take that approach. These ponds are gonna be way oversized, and it'll continually become better.
Thank you, Mr. Brady, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Self. Mr. Bukovac?
I'd like to make a motion to say, to send A1625 to the full council.
Thank you, Mr. Bukovac. We have a motion on the floor. A second, Mr. Van Turen.
Second that.
And due to the nature of discussion on this topic, I'd like to go to an individual vote, please. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes.
I appreciate everybody's consideration and patience.
Thank you, Mr. Brady.
Thank you.
All right, motion passes. And
Move to adjourn.
motion to adjourn, Mr. Winarski?
I'll second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We are adjourned at 8:10. 8:07.
I'm gonna, thank you very much. I'm gonna call police and fire, just because we need to have a fire chief. So it's going out of order here, if that's okay with you, Mr. Mayor.
That's perfect.
Does anyone need to grab a quick glass of water or anything? No?
Shut the door.
There's only one person here. Welcome. This evening, we're going to talk, this is police and fire. We're starting at 8:10 p.m. And on the agenda is A16-24. It's a resolution authorizing the safety, wrong one. The ordinance authorizing the safety service director to purchase a new fire truck through the state purchasing and declaring that an emergency. With that, it was introduced by the Safety Service Director, but I would like to introduce, for the first time here, City Council, our new Fire Chief, Mr. Knoll. If you could, just come on up and maybe start just maybe real briefly, a little background since it's your first visit here, and then
I take that.
Speak as you see fit.
Good evening, Chief Greg Noel, Amherst Fire Department. The proposal tonight is to replace our current rescue truck with what's on the agenda. Basically, the truck we're replacing is 20 years old. The new truck, through the state bid purchasing program, and all the discounts, everything that came through, came in at just under $320,000. So originally, I think we had asked for $350,000, making sure that we had all of our bases covered. But the quote that we had just received on the truck that we're looking at is just under $320,000. So the truck that we're replacing now is 20 years, will be 20 years old by the time we take delivery on this one. They're looking anywhere from 15 to 18 months from time of order to time of delivery. So asking for the emergency now, so basically we can get in line to hopefully have something by the late summer or early next year in the fall.
Anything else? We'll go to the administration, then we'll come back to council first here.
Are there some specifications you could send me about the truck? I know in the past when we've done this, there have been descriptions of models and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I'll get to you.
Oh,
State record has it.
oh, I see,
Yeah.
okay. You can get those to me?
I can.
All right, good.
Okay. Mr. Knoll, or Chief Knoll, just because there's a microphone there and it's, we're introducing this to the public for the first time, and then, Mr. Kukuka?
Yeah, just for council's pleasure, and I do want to concur with the chief, that I believe you're taking this out of the fire apparatus levy. Currently, the balance is $806,000, so we should have more than ample amount to pay for this.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? With that, I'll go to Mr. Miller, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, Chief Knoll, congrats. This is fantastic. We had so many people that were interested in lead us, and we definitely have it capable, and we're excited that you're here, and we thank you for your service once again. I think Amherst will continue to have something to be proud of with you at the helm. So thank you again, and very excited with the fact that we're going to be able to get this fire truck with a grant. That's always a good thing, right? Is that how much of this is being?
No, the SCBA purchase was through the grant.
Okay, so none of this is going to be taken. Okay, so in my earlier conversation, I must have misunderstood when you're like, yeah, this is grant covered. I'm like, wow, that's impressive. Okay, so we have a vehicle that is much needed. It's going to be replaced. It'll come out of a fund that's well funded. So with that, I support this, and feel free to move this to the floor of council. I'll make a motion if we don't have it already.
Okay, Mr. Miller makes a
With
motion.
emergency.
Mr. Ventura?
With the emergency?
Yes, it says right here on it that you want,
I will second
and
that.
declaring an emergency.
Okay,
Absolutely.
we'll continue conversation with that motion in a second, and that will go to Mr. Bukovac next.
Thank you. Just curious, are we going to have a resale value on the old truck?
There is a very minimal resale value on the current truck. Between Mr. Jeffries and the mayor, we're looking at the best options of what to do with the current vehicle. So if possibly we can either sell it, trade it in, or if one of the other city departments maybe can take advantage of it. So we're still looking at the best
There's a
options
very
for
good
it.
chance we might try to utilize it. It has a light tower on it, and that would really help us doing night work sometime with water breaks. So we're evaluating either auction, trade in, or utilize it ourselves.
Just curious how many miles are on it?
Not a lot of miles when you look at a truck like that because of its use. It probably has somewhere around 20,000 miles on it.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bukovac. Anyone else? With that, I'll throw in my 2 cents. I had an opportunity to speak with the chief in the hallway, and my only question was, would it fit underneath our bridges? And the answer is yes. My understanding is also the fire department, you guys had a committee look at this.
Yes.
And it came with, they're very eager to get this. It's exactly what they want.
Yeah, I assigned one of my lieutenants, Brian Urban, to basically to be the head of the committee to not just go out and say, let's just buy a truck, but let's take the time to research. And the younger guys that will have this truck for probably many years after I'm gone, but these are the guys that will be running this truck, and so they're the ones that really went out and did their homework and found out the best option for the city. And there's a lot of different ways we could build a truck, we could do a custom build. It could have been a lot more expensive. The design of this truck is on a commercial chassis with the back half basically being designed at what best fits our what we need, and that truck, had we built it in a custom configuration, would have been about $120,000 more. So purchasing it this way through the state process and a commercial chassis and cab makes it a very feasible purchase for us.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Mr. Bukovac?
What's the manufacturer of the chassis?
It's purchased by, it comes through Freightliner. Freightliner offers a 3-year warranty on this package that basically it comes through Pierce Manufacturing as the builder of the truck. But purchasing the Freightliner through them in the process, it'll have a 3-year warranty on it.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? With that, we have a motion and a second as written, including, or as written, A1624, including the emergency. I'll just take a simple voice vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? With that, it passes 6 to nothing. Mr. Miller,
Move to adjourn.
can I get a second? Mr. Jack.
Second.
With that, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone
Thank you,
against? We adjourn at 8:16. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
This is how we're guaranteed. Guaranteed.
Can we get, you get those beds that we were talking about?
Call the ordinance committee meeting at 8:16. We're going to use the same attendance as the previous meetings. Those once again absent are Councilman Goodell and Council President Dietrich. I'm sorry, I thought you had something. The agenda item is A1621 to amend ACO 741.03 with emergency. And this was brought by Chief of Police. You can see in the packet. I believe he had submitted this through email to Mr. Pecora, correct? And Mr. Pecora forwarded that on. And the ordinance, I'll let you speak on 741.03 for solicitors.
Sure. Basically, the chief of police in the past has, whenever someone wants to solicit in town, typically in the summer months, that's when people are usually out and about, going door to door. We have the present ordinance, the chief, I believe, takes a $25 fee, which is the cost to do a background check through our own system. More and more, we're finding people are coming in from out of state, and the type of background check that the police department can utilize or can perform in our police station doesn't really encompass out-of-state activity, and we feel it's more appropriate to utilize the sheriff's office, which has more of a nationwide reach, so to speak, as far as background checks is concerned. And I don't think we're going to take the $25 fee from the applicants if we're going to do that. So if we find that the applicant is from out of state and we should use, it would best serve the city of Amherst to use a nationwide criminal background search, we'll send them to the sheriff's department, and they will, the applicant will pay for the criminal background with the sheriff's department. So.
Thank you, Mr. Law Director. My understanding was right now we do fingerprinting at the police station right now, currently.
Yeah,
And I was under the understanding of when we did the upgrades to the police department, we also were able to now tap into the nationwide system. Is that
I don't think that's
not the case?
I don't think for this particular purpose is the case, because it's not a criminal investigation. They can do a criminal investigation using the nationwide databases, but since this is not truly a criminal investigation, it's only a background check, we cannot utilize that database for these purposes, and that's why sending them to the sheriff's department is the best alternative.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ramsey, you have a comment?
Yeah, the sheriff's office does this kind of stuff on a regular basis. This is something they've set up for. Excuse me, you see it a lot of times in probate law when someone has to get a background check for a guardianship or something like that. So it sounds like the police are kind of saving their own man hours, just referring it down to the sheriff who's already set up to do it.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Bukovac.
I'll make a motion to send A1621 to the floor of council as written with emergency.
We have a motion on the floor by Councilman Ruckenbach.
Oh, is there a second?
Not yet. Mr. Winarski?
I'll give you a second.
Well, thank you very much. Very generous of you. I appreciate that. I believe, looks like we have a comment that needs
Well,
to be
I was
stated.
just wondering if I could change the wording a little bit without changing the meaning, if that would be objectionable to the council.
Do you want to do that here? We have a motion on the floor. That'll have to be amended
Well,
then.
okay, never mind.
Or do you want to do that? Do you want to put that wording in front of us when we come to the,
I could put it in the ordinance, but the motion is to accept.
take this to the
take-
floor?
Yeah, that
As
language
written.
to the floor, so, okay, I'll just do it that way.
Do you want it amended or do you want it?
No, I'll do it the way it's submitted.
Okay, with that, we'll go to a, just all in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Pass 6-0. All right. We have item A16-22, agenda item. This is repeal O-14-22 and 23 and O-0084 to add deputy treasurer full-time. I'm just going to immediately turn it over to Mr. Ramsey, who's going to speak to this information that's been provided to us in this packet, as you can see here. And I'll let you go from there, Mr. Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. In short, what I'm asking council to do is put the deputy treasurer in the same ordinance with the rest of the full-time non-bargaining employees. And the reason is, in short, that it's really the right thing to do. Our deputy treasurer has been with us for a number of years. I'm, I think, her third treasurer. Her position was created, I want to say, 16 or so years ago, under a certain ordinance that made her part-time. Well, since then, things have changed. She doesn't work part-time hours. She works 39 hours a week. That was last year. The year before was 38-something. The year before that was 38-something, and I keep going and going and going. She works full-time. What she's missing out on is some longevity, I believe, and some additional compensation given the fact that she has an associate's degree. Her vacation time would not change. Sick time is the same, it just wouldn't be prorated. Holidays would bump from 10 to 14, plus she'd get 2 hours to vote and she'd have funeral leave. In terms of any of the expenses, anything additional, it's going to cost the city an extra $891 this year. Next year and every year after that, it will be under $2,200, and that money is all going to be paid out of the budget of my department. So I'm not asking the city, I'm not taking any money from any other department. This is something that just the treasurer's office's department is going to cover. Just trying to think of what else. It's not a raise in her pay rate. There is additional work that has to be done now. You folks are kind of aware of a lot of that stuff with the quarterly statements are now monthly. Retirees have to file. So I think I think that, yeah, the city's saving $2,200 a year, but we're doing it on the back of our deputy treasurer. She does a lot of stuff. She basically manages. I'm the only person that oversees her, you know, but she, for the most part, manages $15 to $18 million for us all. So that's what I'd like to have happen.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. I appreciate you bringing this. I believe it's also long overdue, and I think if it's within your budget and you've worked that out with the mayor and the administration, I support this. But before we do that, I want to go to Mr. Kukuka, who's got something to offer here.
Long before Rick and the treasurer before Rick, the treasurer, Kathy has tried to do this, and it got shot down. Much like my office, I mean, without having Gwen full-time, I mean, that's his deputy treasurer. I mean, you can't run an operation without having a deputy behind you. Karen is the only other one in his office that can sign checks and other things besides Rick. So, I mean, this only is apropos to make this move and do this for Karen. I mean, she has continually increased her responsibilities and what she does in that office. I mean, you know, it only makes total sense to do this. And, you know, like I said, they tried a while ago and it was shot down. I don't know why. I don't think I was on council at that time, but, you know, this only behooves Rick and his office to make it run and continue to run smoothly. And I think it's a great move on his part to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Kabuka. Mr. Van Turen?
I think it sounds more than reasonable, and I admire Mr. Ramsey for bringing this to our attention. With that, I'd move to send this on to the floor, council. We don't need any kind of emergency on this, right?
No, you didn't ask for anything in that regard.
We have a motion on the floor, and we have a second from Ms. Wessel. With that, if there's no more discussion, I'd like to take this to a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, 6-0.
Thank you, guys. She'll really appreciate that.
May I? Anyone? Thank you, Mr. Winarski, again.
Motion to adjourn.
A motion's on the floor to adjourn.
Highly deserved.
She does.
Thank you, Ms. Wessel.
She's a good personality.
We are going to,
You know what I mean?
vote. All those in favor adjourn? Aye. Opposed? Nay. We adjourn at 8:26.
I'm talking about this Terra church.
I'll give you that one.
What does it involve? You have to let us. I mean,